This is from a fantastic series of articles regarding the entire September 11th timeline. The Power of Media Mind Control. By David McGowan. The Center for an Informed America Worldwide web.devesweb.pinchost.com. Demolishing a high-rise office building that has outlived its usefulness is a daunting task. As a general rule, tall buildings tend to grow in clusters, much like mushrooms, and the owners and occupants of the surrounding buildings usually frown upon having their own buildings damaged or destroyed in the process of bringing down a neighboring building. The trick then is to get the unwanted building to drop straight down, forming a neat pile that doesn't extend much beyond the structure's original footprint. That is not something that tall buildings are naturally inclined to do. A large structure can be brought down in that manner, but it is an extremely difficult trick to pull off. A considerable amount of study, planning and preparation is required. Specific quantities of explosives have to be precisely placed at key structural locations throughout the building, and those explosive charges have to be programmed to detonate in a specific pattern.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
There is almost no margin for error. Only a handful of companies have the technical expertise to take on such a project. When one of these highly specialized demolition companies does their job properly, the result is a spectacular show during which the targeted building seems to self-destruct and simply drop away from the skyline, as though it had never been there at all. The show is generally over in just a few seconds, making the entire process appear to be very quick and easy. But it is decidedly not easy. When a building implodes, all that we, as spectators, see is the end result of months of research and preparation by a team of specialists with decades of training and experience. Buildings never implode by accident, at least they never did before September 11, 2001. But the South World Trade Center tower did, at 9:59 a.m. that fateful day.
Almost looks like one of those planned implosions.
And the North World Trade Center tower did as well, at 10:28 a.m. And then WTC-7 did the very same thing, at about 5:20 p.m. In less than 8 hours' time, 3 separate high-rise office buildings allegedly did what no buildings in history have done before, spontaneously collapsed into their own footprints. The inexplicable collapse of the Twin Towers has always been the single most compelling aspect of the events of that day, compelling, because the controlled collapses point directly to inside involvement, and compelling, because this evidence of direct U.S. sponsorship of the attacks has always been brazenly displayed for all to see. The evidence suggesting that Flight 77 did not hit the Pentagon was not immediately available, but rather was developed over a considerable period of time. It was immediately apparent that routine procedures for responding to potential emergencies were not followed that day, but grasping that concept required exercising a little independent thought, rather than just robotically processing the propaganda blizzard of words and images that followed the attacks. Most people, reeling from the media assault, were unable to connect the dots and recognize that a stand down had occurred. And most people have never seen the body of photographic evidence that overwhelmingly suggests that a passenger plane did not hit the Pentagon. Even many skeptics have not seen that evidence, thanks to the zealous efforts of the September 11th gatekeepers. But virtually everyone saw the Twin Towers brought down in controlled demolitions. In fact, most people have likely seen footage of the twin collapses replayed dozens of times. Perhaps what is most compelling then about the collapse of the towers is that the very images that were seared into our brains, as reminders of the horrific nature of the attacks, are the same images that should have been presented as Exhibit A in the people's case against the real perpetrators of the crimes committed that day. The collapsed towers, in other words, are iconic symbols of the power of media and information control. The tower collapses, airing, as the dramatic final acts in the September 11th production, were meant to be seen. And with the knowledge that we were witnessing, in real time, the tragic deaths of untold numbers of victims, the images were meant to horrify and traumatize. A traumatized subject, you see, is a receptive subject, and when you are trying to sell the need for a fundamental shift in our collective reality, it helps to have as many traumatized, compliant subjects as possible. And it helps to provide images that aren't easily forgotten. Imagine, if the Twin Towers had not collapsed that day. Imagine no endlessly replayed footage of the spectacular collapses. Imagine no footage of massive devastation. No ground zero. No footage of dazed, dust-covered New Yorkers. No instantaneous revision of the New York skyline. No tributes to the scores of dead firefighters. No heart-wrenching appeals from family members desperately seeking information on relatives likely buried deep in the rubble. Without the collapses, would the events of September 11th have had the same impact? Would Americans, with their notoriously short memories, still vividly recall the images and the human drama from that day, or would we have largely moved on, giving little more thought to September 11th than we do to the bombing of the Oklahoma City Federal Building? Is it the loss of life that causes the events of that day to linger in our collective memory, or is it the harrowing and ubiquitous images of massive property destruction? In order for the attacks of September 11th to serve as the catalyst for a realignment of the group mind, the events of that day had to play out on a grand scale. The spectacular collapses of the towers were, therefore, undoubtedly the most important component of the production. But they were also the riskiest aspect of the production, since there was no way to disguise the fact that the collapses were, by necessity, the result of controlled demolitions. The collapses then represented a fundamental weakness in the master plan. Were it not for the virtually complete control exercised by Washington over the media, both mainstream and alternative, the twin collapses would almost certainly have been recognized as an obvious smoking gun. Of course, the perpetrators never had any reason to doubt their ability to thoroughly control the flow of information, both in the media and in the so-called skeptics community.